Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Gopher Solutions webinar. My name is Tabor Sawatsky, and I'm with Gopher. For those of you who are new to our webinar series, this is a monthly webinar, and it focuses on a variety of physical education subjects and topics. Some of our past webinar topics have included PE teachers presenting on specific activities like assessment and fitness. Past presenters have included Dr. Robert Pangrazi, Dr. John Medina, and Gene Blades. Our presenters have done a really great job of bringing topics and information that have been useful to the field of physical education. And our webinars will almost always occur the third week of every month. And all attendees of today's webinar will receive a certificate of participation for 1 hour of educational credit. And all attendees will also be entered to win the Assess Pro Testing Resource Pack, which is valued at $349. The pack includes everything you need to create easy fitness testing stations throughout the gym. It includes our smart holders and the assessment station cards, everything you need to do assessments within stations. Today's webinar is titled Learning and Applying Active Assessment in PE with Aaron Beatley. And before I introduce Aaron, I wanted to mention that we will have the chance for questions during the presentation. If something comes to mind that you have a question on at any time during the presentation, you can type that question on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a questions box. Only myself, the moderator, can see it, so feel free to ask any questions you might have, and we'll accumulate those questions throughout the webinar and get to as many of them as we can with Aaron at the end of the presentation. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our presenter, Aaron Beatley. Aaron holds a PhD from Arizona State University, specializing in physical education and physical activity for youth. He is currently a faculty member in the Department of Kinesiology and Health Promotion at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Beatley has worked with school districts, recreation programs, and youth sport organizations across the country in their efforts to maximize physical activity experiences and promote youth to be physically active for a lifetime. He is the author and co-author of more than 60 research-based and practical articles. In addition, he was the lead author on NASP's Comprehensive School Physical Activity Promotion Position Statement and serves on the Let's Move Active Schools Physical Activity Leader Training Development Team. Beatley is also a co-author of 5 books promoting physical activity and health in the classroom, Pedometer Power, Pedometer Power 2nd Edition, and Dynamic Physical Education for Elementary School Children. At this time, I will turn it over to our presenter. Aaron, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Tabor, and good, I guess, morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. So we have some folks from Hawaii, so appreciate you all being here. It's an honor to present these ideas on applying physical activity or applying assessments and maintaining physical activity levels of kids. Before I go any further, I want to make sure I thank the people that these aren't all my ideas. And this is a presentation that Dr. Heather Irwin and I had done several years ago, so I've borrowed some of that heavily. She's conveniently my wife, so it's okay, I guess. You'll see some other names on here like Kevin Prusak and Martha Woods, but I'd also like to thank Deb and Bob Pangrazi for the foundation of understanding some of these ideas with respect to assessments. So here we go. The first thing I wanted to kind of convey is you see these pictures and kind of what they represent, regardless of how you're keeping track of data. I think these assessments are something that are extremely important. Some of you may be too young, but that little tiny box with the green in it is a personal digital assistant, or PDA, not public display of affection, which were big in the late 80s or late 90s and early 2000s, and they were going to revolutionize how we did assessments, and we can see how far that went. So my point with that is technology is great. It's just one of these things to use as a tool to make our assessments that more efficient and that's much more effective. Just a little bit, my focus, or how I'm going to work today is I'm going to talk a little bit about some background information on accountability and what type of assessments, and then I'm going to spend the last part of the presentation showing specific examples of assessments. So obviously when we go into looking into assessment, we have to assess, obviously. We need to demonstrate some student learning. It's also nice to look at teacher competence, narrowing the achievement gap, but I don't think that's an argument. I think the key is to how we do that, and that's why I titled this Active Assessments, as I'm going to talk later. I think we have to make sure that kids are active while we're assessing, and that's not always as easy to do as it is said. I think that when we look at the assessment, one of the things that we kind of lose track of is we look at, well, yeah, they can skip, or no, they can't, and we don't really dig into the assessments and say, how can I improve my instruction? Or using the data to help students make curriculum changes. It could be, wow, they weren't ready for that assessment yet. They didn't have the skills, so we need to revamp our curriculum to make sure we implement that earlier to get them plenty of repetitions and refinement before we decide to assess. So many times we get into that, we just want to let them throw for a few minutes and then assess them, and we have to get into looking at bigger picture. And it could be the programmatic changes that, wow, we've decided that first grade really can't handle that type of jump rope activity, or other decisions that can be made. So I think there's some important decisions that can be made based on data that you have from assessing. Just real briefly, this is just going to talk about some ideas of what it can look like in physical education, whether you look at, this is going to be 4 Ps. This is, I wish I could remember where I got this from. I don't know exactly where I got this from. This isn't my idea, the 4 Ps. The products or drawings, videos. I know when I was teaching, we had kids draw. If we had rainy days and we couldn't go outside and we couldn't get in a classroom, if we had a small classroom or small space, we would have them draw the types of activities they like. Coincidentally, it was always the activity we had done the day before in PE. But it's the idea of something that we can do if our space is limited in those situations. Older students, K through or high school, they can start designing brochures, bulletin boards, thinking outside the box, those types of things. Depending on your PE program and exactly what you're doing, those may or may not fit with your overall philosophy in your PE program. Looking at the processes, again, whether kids can create, and you'd have to create a rubric on this, but creating a game or an obstacle course, one of my favorite activities, I called it Game Inventors of America. I don't know where I got the idea, but we would give kids a cone, a jump rope, and a ball, and 4 kids had to invent a game where everybody could participate. You only allowed 2 rules, everybody had to be active, etc. So you could evaluate that and look at if you're doing some cooperative activities with problem solving. Effort gets a little tricky because it's really hard to evaluate kids on effort. But that would be a totally different presentation, and if you're interested in that, I'm more than willing to talk to you about that. See, we have a question about copies of slide presentation. Yes, you will be able to get the slide presentation, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. What else can it look like? Portfolios, they were kind of a big thing a few years ago, and they've kind of haven't heard much about them, but I think they're a great idea, particularly in middle and high school, where students can start tracking information and not just tests, but writing, and why wasn't I active, and why was I less active during this gymnastics unit than I was during this orienteering unit, and really start thinking and writing their thoughts and what they're learning, and use that and keep track of that in portfolio. As I'm talking, I'm using my hands as if, the old school portfolio with a 3-inch binder, but now obviously that could be something that was done electronically. And the last P is the performance with what we typically think of with skills and concepts and movement sequences and activity levels and those types of things that what we typically think of, and frankly what I'm going to focus mostly on today is these last kind of performance assessments. Before I go any further, I want to make just real clear about these terms because they're used interchangeably, and I want to be clear what I'm going to talk about today. Assessment, which is what I'm going to focus on, is simply just collecting information on one of the 3 domains. That's all we're just collecting the data. Then if you use that data to judge student performance, that is evaluation. And then in essence, if you use that evaluation to give them a grade or a score, that is grading. I'm not going to address how you evaluate students, how you grade. Obviously, I have lots of thoughts. You've read anything I've written in recent years, there's lots of thoughts on what we should and shouldn't evaluate and grade kids on. I'm just going to focus on the assessment and how you're going to garner the data and what you're going to use to get data. From there, again, it's kind of a totally different presentation, but I just want to focus on the assessment for the purpose of this presentation. So how do I do it? How am I going to get this data? This is when I was teaching, this is something that I struggled with, and I know looking back that I didn't do it very efficiently, had lots of sitting time, lots of kids watching other kids throw and things that if I went back and looked, it was just awful. And so that's one of the things I wanted to make sure and emphasize is it has to be efficient and it has to be active. I've seen lots of pictures and things going around Twitter of people assessing, and the assessments are great, but you look in the background and half the kids are sitting down waiting to be assessed. And that creates issues. That's less activity. Recently I worked with some teachers that wanted to do 1 day on assessing and then one at a time, or 1 day on throwing and then one at a time they assessed the kids throwing 10 at a time. And again, most of you listening here are probably cringing a little bit at that. You don't lose weight standing on a scale, and you're not going to get any better at this by being assessed over and over and over and watching kids throw. You have to throw, and you can get more and more reps. That's what we want. But if you're going to do this efficiently and actively, you're going to have to plan ahead. You're going to have forms ready. It's not a matter of, oh yeah, next class I have to run up and get these copies made and get them laminated. It's going to take some time and planning ahead. And working with classroom teachers. I forget the details of this, but when I was teaching, we started using pedometers. And we created what we thought was a brilliant table for kids to record their data. But what we didn't realize is that we had it all backwards, how they were being taught in the classroom, how to record data and how to look at a table. So all it would have taken was for us to go to the classroom teacher and say, what does this look like, and can they do this? And another example of something I messed up is I didn't realize how big a first grader's handwriting was. I didn't have kids at the time. So just little things like that require us to meet with the classroom teachers. It also shows the classroom teachers that we're not, quote unquote, just the PE teacher. And you know what, we had to get a degree too, just like you. And again, there's a lot of that kind of out there, and it's a great way to meet with the classroom teachers and show them what we're trying to do. The other piece of this is you have to develop systems. Just like it's not a great idea to leave all of your playground balls in a trash can, again, something I did when I was teaching, it's a good idea to spread those playground balls out so kids can get them efficiently and get back engaged in activity. It's the same thing if you're using 3x5 cards for students to record pedometer data, then you need to have those spread out. We used to put them in frisbees and had pencils with the frisbees, and we used to number pedometers and all these other things. That system is how it's up to you, but it has to be some system that it's efficient, can be done hopefully in less than 30 seconds. Fortunately, now Gopher has downloadable pedometers, so we don't have to have kids record data and then put that data in an Excel sheet and try and make sure I didn't mess it up and things like that. But if you're going to do these assessments and do them well, you have to have some kind of system, especially if the kids are going to need pencils to jot things down if you're doing exit slips and those types of things. So what I'm going to spend time on today are these efficient assessment tools. Coincidentally, if you've just looked at the most recent issue of Jopard, there's some checklists and things like that, and discusses a lot of these issues that I'm talking about. So checklists, entrance and exit slips. Entrance slips were kind of a big deal here in Lexington when I first moved here. Fortunately, they've gone away from them because an entrance, when they have PE, a 6-day rotation, so they have PE once every 6 days. So if you come in 6 days, which there's a weekend in there, 8 days, and ask what you learned the day before, it's really hard for kids to come up with that. But they have found exit slips are great. Some teachers do quote unquote exit slips, but it's with clickers and things of that nature. So it's questioning at the end to find out some information. We're also going to talk about peer assessments and self-assessments, and then self-assessment as a station. And I think the key to this one, if you're doing self-assessment as a station, is to not necessarily, I keep bringing up throwing just because it's in my head. I was just teaching a lesson on it. So if you're teaching throwing, you might have the assessment and explain it to the students, but then other stations have different things. And at this one station, you're keeping an eye on it to make sure they're not checking, yep, I'm doing all these things when they don't have a clue how to throw. But you're making sure that they're assessing, but you're not always at one station, because you get at one station, you know what happens to the rest of the class. So again, it goes back to this efficiency and planning ahead. Another tool that we have used and gained some momentum, and I haven't heard as much about it lately, is this idea of using homework. I love physical activity calendars. We had a master's student that just did a thesis on this. I think there's lots of potential for it. The thing I think we have to be really, really careful on, and one I'm really focused on lately, just from some mentoring and some exposure to some kids' lives that I really wasn't aware of, is that when we send home a physical activity calendar that says your parents have to initial that you did this, it creates lots of dilemmas for kids, whether they don't see their parents or their parents aren't going to do it, and then they do it, and they're essentially quote unquote cheating. And so that kind of thing I think is somewhat troublesome. But I think if we can do physical activity calendars, I know we've written some articles on this, and we advocated putting healthy snacks at the bottom. What a healthy snack is, that's not for the kid because we know they don't buy their snacks, but it's for the parents so they know kind of what are some healthy snacks you could get for your kids. But a physical activity calendar is as simple as kids just putting on their, do jumping jacks. If you're going to watch TV, which they're going to, we're not going to get them not to watch TV, do jumping jacks and other activities during commercials. Most TV shows, I think, are like 22 minutes. So that's 16 minutes. If they sit for an hour, that's 16 minutes of activity. If your kids are like mine, they want to get on the iPad so they don't have to watch commercials, but you just have to take care of that quickly, and that doesn't happen as much. It does happen, but not nearly as much, especially if I fall asleep and don't pay attention. So the next thing I want to look at, and I talked about this briefly, is don't just do the assessments just for kicks and giggles. Just use it. Use the data, because it doesn't do any good if you put the data on top of the filing cabinet and then the next year you just put another stack on top of that and it just gets more dust, and you just we need to use the data to, as I said earlier, improve instruction. Maybe the sequence was wrong. Maybe wow, I should have taught long rope before individual jump rope, because in long rope the only thing they have to do is jump. They don't have to turn the rope. Maybe that would have been a better idea, and then you can change your curriculum based on that. It could be that you need practice on your instruction. If you're looking at physical activity levels, it could be, wow, I talked a lot during that lesson. Students aren't ready. It's not an appropriate activity. There's all kinds of things we can get from the data, but one of the things, if you're not going to use the data, you're wasting your time doing the assessments. I think there's some valuable information from very, very simple assessments. So just real quickly, I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent. But where does this all fit in this whole process, and where do you create your assessments, and how does this drive this? Well, the first thing I will tell you is I am a proponent of using process-based evaluation. What process-based in my mind, I don't know if that's a term others use, but is I have cues for teaching, as you'll see for throwing and other activities. I give those cues, and then I assess whether kids can perform those cues. Going back to throwing. Some kids will never be able to throw and hit a target 8 out of 10 times. Why do we use 8 out of 10? I haven't heard anybody give me a good rationale for it yet. But whatever you set your limit at. But most kids can learn to step in opposition, and they can learn to get their elbow up, or they can learn to follow through, or they can learn other cues. So that's where I start my assessment process, is what are my cues? Because my cues are going to ultimately impact my objectives. So when I teach students and work with teachers on developing objectives, to tie into this process base, I use what's called the ABCDs of objectives. And the A is your actor. So at the end of the lesson, the student will be able to, or nowadays, this year it's I can here in Lexington. That's changed a couple times. The B is the behavior. So catch a beanbag. At the end of the lesson, I will be able to catch a beanbag. Okay, that's great, but then there's lots of openness to that. The next thing is a C, which is your criteria. So catch a beanbag while walking between 2 cones, for whatever reason, if you want to do it while stationary. Then the degree is the last piece, and this is what gets into the assessments, is demonstrating 2 of 4 cues for catching. So when I go to assess, I'm looking whether they can do 2 of the 4 cues that I use for catching. What other, we're pinkies together, thumbs together, giving, whatever your cues are. So it's the ABCDs. It's crucial to do this because the rest of the assessments go along with this, that the student will be able to catch a beanbag while stationary, demonstrating 2 of 4 cues, or et cetera. Because then, as you're going to see in my assessments, all of these assessments are based on cues, at least the first 5 or 6 of them, I think. So you create the assessment, implement the assessment efficiently, and then you use the data to reflect. So this all ties together. It all goes back to the objectives you pick, and it all goes back to the cues that you pick. And that's why these assessments are so highly individual, because every teacher uses different cues. So before I get into these assessments, real quickly, a follow-up email from this will have this link, and this link will lead you to all the assessments I'm going to show you. What I'm going to show you, we had to modify a little bit to get on a slide. They're all just Word documents. You can cut and paste and delete names and other kinds of things on there if you want, and then put your own cues in there, and you'll see a little bit what I mean here in a second. So this is a sample checklist. This is simple. The students on the left are all real students I've had in studies. all great kids and taught me so much about teaching. I can remember each and every one of them, and teaching me about physical activity as well as some of the things we did in PE. So this is what a checklist looks like. Now, as a teacher, when you're doing this, you do not want to check everything they do. You simply check what they don't do. So at the beginning of a lesson, if you have kids walk in and have them walk on your, some teachers call it the trail, some teachers call it their whatever color rectangle, whatever their boundaries are, they're walking straight, you could do the assessment then. You could also do the assessment while they're scattered, say everybody walk anywhere you want inside the area, and they do that. Or you could do walking during a game. That's up to what your objective is. Goes back to your criteria and your degree. If your criteria is while playing, walking while, or skipping while playing tag, then you would put them in a tag game, and you're just watching to see are their arms natural, are their natural stride, etc. That's all you're looking for. Check, check. Now, you can see if you have an iPad or something with touchscreen, you can make this a lot easier for yourself with some programming and things. With throwing, T-elbow step follow through is what I've used in the past. Anymore, I'm going more towards X and point and eliminating the actual step so they just twist, because the step is where kids get kind of confused, but that's for another day as well. But you can see the idea here with a checklist. It's pretty straightforward. The important piece is just check what they're not doing. Most kids will be able to make a T. Follow through maybe where they're, the step is where they struggle, and then you get your stickers out and put stickers on the foot they're supposed to step with, etc. This is just the same thing with backhand frisbee throws. Again, these are just the cues I use. So as a teacher, you would take these when you get these electronically and just change the cues to whatever you use and put your student names on there. Individual jump rope, you can see what the cues are as well. So that's, again, very simple, but can be very effective and provide you lots of information. If you're doing backhand frisbee throw and you're noticing when you're doing the assessment, almost every time you click, you click, I'm using an iPad, but you touch curl to chest, that means if half the kids aren't doing it, there was probably an issue with the instruction and you need to improve that. Again, great information to know as a teacher that if you didn't do the assessment, you might not observe. Another example, this is a peer assessment. So for this example, you might have kids in groups of 3, and this would be something you'd print out and laminate so you can use a dry erase marker and they can check off. So they watch their partner, and you can even, I have 1 box here, you could have 10 boxes next to there, however you want to set it up. But they watch. One partner's tossing and the other partner's catching, and the observer is watching and making sure they're watching for the beanbag, they're striding to it, they're getting in front of it, reach and bend. Again, these are all the cues I use. This, if you go in Word or PowerPoint, this takes you less than 5 minutes to make, and it can be something that you can, another value of this is you walk up behind the students as the observer, and the person's not watching it and not getting in front, and they're checking all of them off, then the kid that's observing doesn't know what's going on either. And so we found out even with college students when we do this, they think everything you're going to do, you're going to grade them on it. So they want to just, everybody got 10 out of 10 when they really didn't know. Once you say, you're not grading you on this, I just want you to get better and recognize it, it helps. And everybody's engaged. One kid watches for 10 reps, and then they rotate. So it's a very little downtime. This is one I alluded to earlier. It looked like got a little messed up here, but the attitude checklist. This is one that it's just nice if you have, if you get a kid that has lots of issues with attitude and effort and things like that, and you grade them down. It's always nice to have data when a parent comes. So if you have one of these, you can put the students. I have the students across the top here, but shows concern for others. These are the kinds of things that you can watch for to demonstrate an attitude. And again, it's very difficult to assess, but it gets kind of at the idea of what we're trying to do. Frisbee, this is something for older kids, and the reason it should be obvious that it's for older kids is the directions are similar to what we've done in the past, but you give it to the students. They have to read and figure this out. So on the right, they're writing whether they got it or needs improvement. They're evaluating each other. So you have an observer at the top, performer at the top, and as a teacher, you can circulate and see what's going on and whether they're understanding that. Again, let me reiterate, what you're going to get in the handout that you're going to get in an email, a link to it, will have a lot more than just one Frisbee throw. It'll have several different Frisbee activities, catching and those types of things. So again, same idea, peer assessment, but for older kids, you can give them the directions, give them more control of what they're doing. This one is, as you can see from the top, Kevin Prusak from Brigham Young University. this is an exciting one. It's one it takes a little bit of explaining. Obviously, it's for high school. It's got some pretty in-depth instructions at the top. But essentially how it would work is you would give these to students, and they're on their own. They for example, this is badminton. On the first one, they would flick hit 20 consecutive underhand shots, forehand and backhand. You can use 3 redos, so you get some mulligans, and do this 3 times and have your partner initial number when you complete it. So if you do it once, the partner initials 1. If you do it twice, 2. And if you do it 3 times, 3, and then that would be related to your points. If you want to put a score, again, that goes to the evaluation and grading that we're not going to talk about, and that's up to you. But so you can see what has underhand clears, and you can see what the most instead of flicking it to yourself from a partner serve, it gets a little bit more complex. Again, this puts all the onus on the student to learn and to educate themselves, which is huge. When we get into middle school and high school and they start to evaluate themselves, and then as a teacher, you come around, I think this one, maybe the other one, that every third one or something, you have to show the teacher that you've completed it and that whoever we witnessed it is there standing there watching too. Again, this takes a lot of work up front. It doesn't have as much related to the cues as the previous ones. This is more just performance-based. But you could turn this into cues if you wanted to really focus on the cues. If they're having trouble with overhand clear, which is backhand overhead clear, which is tough, then yeah, you can have focus on cues with that if you would like. This is a similar assessment for frisbees. Again, program practice sheet. We've just modified what Kevin has created and used it. You can look there. This one we've added, we put thumb on top of disc, remaining fingers under rim. You could just exclusively focus on that as opposed to whether they can throw and catch. Entirely up to you as a teacher. It's why you have to modify things based on what your philosophy and what the students want. I mean, it could be the students are like, we want to focus on this. Okay, then we can regroup and send it off that way. It's just a matter of, again, going back to when you develop your curriculum, you have certain philosophies, and then when you develop your lesson plans, those philosophies impact that. When you develop your objectives, that same philosophy is impacted, and that's going to impact your assessments as well. This one is, you can see, courtesy of Martha Woods. She teaches in Virginia, I believe now. This one is for high school. Well, you can look through this, and what you hope has happened, and again, some of this is not utopian, I wouldn't say, but it's based on a little bit of assumption that the students that come to you have learned some of these fundamental things related to cardiovascular endurance and what the difference, obviously walking, jogging, running, but what that's going to make your body feel like and sweat and things like that. But this helps reiterate that. And if you have a fitness center and you do things like this, this is great. You could also do it outside. It would, obviously your pictures wouldn't work as well, but it could be something that you use. And the big piece of this is the easy, medium, hard. Again, if you're doing this pre and post, if you have high school kids and they can demonstrate fitness changes, then that would be something you would do. But then at the conclusion of your 5 minutes, your heart rate was, and they have to fill that out. And then, do you expect your beats per minute to increase or decrease? Why? Now, is that a very fundamental question? Yes. So you could change that as the year goes on. Everything else is the same, but this is, why did it go up? Why didn't it go down? What was the nature of your activities? If you look back at your, you could accompany this with a log. If you look back at your log, why do you think sometimes your beats per minute decreased and sometimes it increased? What was going on, et cetera, and talk about those types of things. Just opens up so many doors to have individual conversations with kids just based on a simple assessment. And again, as they get older in high school, they get a lot more freedom, and they can start figuring these things out and doing a lot more, again, thinking and putting this all together as to, I developed, I'm in a aerobic fitness class, and I developed this individual intervention for myself, and now I do this pre and post, and it didn't work. Why? And those are much more valuable lessons than kids just saying, yep, it worked. Where it's not a bad thing for it not to work. What we don't want to have happen is you leave our program and not know why it didn't work. And because the reality is, I mean, again, I said this is more for middle school and high school. Once they're done there, they're not going to get much else. As far as ideally, they'd get K through 12. but and they're not going to get much more. And so we have to do what we can with these assessments and use them as talking points and openers to conversations with kids, because that's what we're trying to do. Again, early on when I talked about this checklist, it was generating conversation within yourself. You can talk to kids and say, can you do this again, and show them. It gives great opportunity for you to say, yeah, we're really going to work on swinging those arms in opposition, or galloping. Make sure that one foot doesn't come in front of the other. Little things like that that you wouldn't have realized if you didn't go through and get those data. So again, my email is on here as well. I've just delved into the world of Twitter. So if you have questions or comments, you can do email or Twitter. Either one of those, Aaron Beatley or Dynamic Phys Ed will work. More than happy to discuss these ideas with you. I know this is designed as an activity session, so it didn't work real well on a webinar, but I think the information is there. And I think as a field, if we can push forward and realize that assessment isn't just a game we have to play, it's to make ourselves better and to improve what we do for the betterment of kids, then we are using assessments for what they should be used for. And
Thanks,
now
Aaron.
we're going to open it up for questions. I didn't get a chance to look and see if we had any questions as we went.
Yeah,
Tabor, sorry.
Yeah, we do. I'll just reminding the audience that if you have any questions, feel free to put them on the questions box on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll get to as many of those as we can here with Aaron. The first question, Aaron, is what activities do you find that kids can self-monitor most effectively when you're assessing them on FitnessGram or similar performance assessment?
I guess I'm not real sure. Let me say, what activities do you find that kids can self-monitor most effectively? I guess related to fitness, I don't know if you can clarify the question, but
yeah, I think they're, getting at some of those slides that you had in there where, you're talking about how you could have a station where the students are, doing the assessment on each other. Are there any of them that are more effective for that, or does it not really matter?
My take on FitnessGram is it should all be self-assessment. I think that if you look at some of the research and things that we can teach kids how to assess themselves. Obviously, their accuracy is an issue, but there's other issues with that as well. But I think they can self-monitor all the FitnessGram activities, whether for example, with Pacer, they tell us how many laps, and it's again teaching them how to do it. Are they going to lie? Yeah, they could write. One kid, I remember we did it, and one kid wrote down 78, and I know he didn't do 78 laps. So you talk to them for a little bit, and you say, how did you do? And they just didn't know, and that's fine. Obviously, this one kid I was thinking of just didn't count. That was his problem. But I think they can self-monitor all of FitnessGram. If that gets at the question, I'm just not.
Yeah. And just a reminder for everybody, too, that this presentation and all of our webinar presentations are archived at the Gopher website. So if you want to take this back to your school, to your PE department, share it with somebody, watch it again, all of our past webinars are there, and this one will be as well. Question on I don't know if you still have the control to go back on the slides, but question on slide 20 about the badminton assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And the numbers at the bottom, what are those again? And is it that the first part of the question is, would these scores be tied to a grade or not necessarily?
You could, if you wanted to. What these numbers are is it says do this 3 times and have your partner initial the number when completed. So you do it once, twice, and 3 times. Now, It says over here score, and it has a /30. You could tie that to a score if you wanted to, and that gets into the evaluation and the grading perspective. Or you could have it as a little tiny part of your grade, a big part of your grade. Again, but that's what those numbers are for. So then someone, as a teacher, someone watched this kid do that.
And then based on the part of it where it says, so do the work and get the credit, does that refer to that, not everybody has the skill to be, skill level A in some cases? Is that kind of what that's referring to? If you,
yes.
Wherever you're at in your skill level and you've done it, you can get max credit?
That's exactly right. Because, again, there's so many other issues related to skill level that could be out of the student's control, et cetera, and that, you give, again, this is a grading issue, but it's, how do you successfully promote lifelong physical activity and get a kid to want to be in badminton and keep trying it? I'm from the ilk of giving them a 1 out of 30 isn't going to motivate them to want to continue badminton.
Right.
Whereas focusing on process and moving towards, you only got you got 10 out of 30. That's okay. That's where you are now. Maybe we'll do this again at the end of the year and we'll see where you are. Those types of things that it can be used for. It doesn't necessarily have to associate with a score in a grade book and then ultimately a grade.
Right. Kind of a real world application from a teacher. When you're trying to assess 24 student class, grades K through 4, how do you get accurate data from a self-monitoring standpoint? Self-monitoring from this question for these age groups is a challenge. I'm sure that's something that, a lot of people are looking at. I've got 24 kids, that type of age group. Can you take us through that type of a scenario and how you do that?
Yeah, I can just explain kind of how I've done it. I didn't have the fortunes of an iPad when I was teaching, but essentially, if skipping or something, again, this is simple, but you can be more. I don't necessarily have to grade every kid every day either. I can pick the first 12. I can pick kids that I know. I mean, for example, with skipping, if you're doing that in the first or second grade, you're going to know the kids that you're really watching for with skipping. But if it's something with, I don't know, a pass or something in volleyball, you don't have to do every kid every day. You can pick it. Now, again, how I set my curriculum, I have an introductory of fitness, a focus, and a game where my intro can be lots of things. I can have kids get a volleyball and pass with a partner the next day and finish up my grading if I need to. And then I can get to the rest of my lesson. So you don't have to get to every kid every day. But if you do, if you want to get to 24 and you have them walking, you can go away from the activity for a little bit, because if you want kids walking in a straight line and you're doing around the perimeter of your teaching area, that's going to get old by the time you get to the 24th kid. Mm-hmm. So I think the question said there, I don't think it said they're squirrely, but it said something about their challenge. Yeah, it's a challenge, and it is.
Self-monitoring was the part that was a challenge in addition to that, too.
Okay, yeah. So I think if you can get to a few kids, again, you'll know the kids you really need to watch, and you'll pick up on this, and then go away from the activity for a little bit, and then say, you know what, let's walk on the perimeter again. And then you can get your clipboard or your iPad. I got a clipboard. You can get an iPad out, and you can evaluate kids again and come back to it again. It won't take you more than maybe a minute or two to do 5, but I don't suggest you do this for 6 or 7 minutes to get all 25 or 30 or 75 or how many kids you have. So it's one of these you can come back to it later and do the assessment as well. It doesn't have to be all at one time.
Okay. And at those grades, do you have the kids do self-monitoring or self-assessments or group?
What was the first part?
At that grade, do you have, that K through 4, do you have kids do peer assessments or self-monitoring?
That's a good question. I think it would depend on the second grader, but I think by third grade they can. Some second graders probably could do it.
Okay.
Again, you're going to know your class. I can tell you some fifth grade classes that I've seen that you probably couldn't do it.
Right.
But that's going to depend on the class. But I would no earlier than second grade.
Okay. All right. Question on the assessment data, and you had mentioned, make sure you use it, do something with it, and you brought up one of the examples is to, make sure that your teaching is effective in the areas where you're assessing. If you see an area where, a lot of kids aren't hitting the mark, that might be an area to address with the teaching. Any other things that you can suggest as far as how to use that data, effectively rather than just letting it sit on top of a file cabinet?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think the communicating with parents is again another way to show what we're doing in physical education, and it shows them what you're looking for. If you send home a jump rope assessment with what this individual child was struggling with, that shows the parent, hey, maybe this is something we could work on, opens up communication. It's not, again, my opinion is you don't give them, don't grade them down because of it. You're just letting the parents know where they are. So communicating with parents, I think you could, depending on what your data you're using, if you're collecting physical activity data, it can tell you so much as a teacher. one of the things I forgot to mention, but physical activity data along with the video of yourself will tell you so much, and you can assess from that video later on. That would be another way if you had 24 kids you couldn't get to. If you could video them, that would be a great way to do it as well. But if you have physical activity level and your pedometer data, or you can get physical activity level from a video. Just when most of the kids are active, start the stopwatch, and most of the kids are stopped, you stop it. You can tell so much as a teacher, whether you're frustrated, what you're into, those types of things, and then combine that with your physical activity data to really show a lot about what you're trying to do as a teacher.
Yeah, makes sense. Kind of a technology question. Any apps for the iPad or whatever that you've run into that really work well and assist with assessment?
Yeah, the one I'm going to give Chad Triolet, who also does stuff with Gopher. I don't know the exact app. I don't even know if it was an app or if it was something else that maybe he set up his camera. But it was great for self-assessment because he had this camera set up and it videoed kids. I think, it's Dartfish. Yeah, it does this as well. But you videotape, and then he had it on delay showing on the other side. So I throw 5 times, and then 10 seconds later it starts showing me on the other side, and I can assess myself whether I was doing it or not, and then I go to the next station, and the next kid comes around. So that kind of technology I think is there. I'll be perfectly honest, I'm by no means an expert on this technology. I know there's quite a few guys on Twitter. The one I'm thinking of is PE Geeks and several others that are well beyond me and will blow your mind at the stuff they know about Twitter and other types of assessments. So again, probably that's one of my weaker areas as far as applying these with technology.
No, that sounds good. All right, that's going to do it here. Before I announce the winner of our giveaway for our webinar attendee, I wanted to remind everybody that you will receive in your email a certificate of participation, and also we will have a link to the archived webinar. I mentioned all of our past webinars are archived there, so if you want to go back and see any of those, it's also a great tool if you have PE department meetings on a monthly basis or whatever, and you want to bring in some content for everybody. It's an easy way to do that. So the winner of the Assess Pro Testing Resource Pack, valued at $349, is Terry Riley, PE teacher from Foothills Elementary School. So congratulations, Terry. We'll get that sent out. Our webinars do almost always occur the third week of every month, so keep an eye out for next month's webinar topic. And we thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. And thank you, Aaron. We hope to see all of you at another webinar in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.